Hello, and welcome to So I've Been Told. I'm Adam Kramer, the host of this podcast, and this is the first episode, so I just wanted to give a little introduction. And I've been playing in bands and booking shows for the last 10 years in central Pennsylvania and Rochester, New York, and I've met a lot of really cool, interesting people along the way. So what I'm planning on doing is having conversations with some of those people and then sharing with you all because I've got friends who do some really cool stuff. I've gotten really into podcasts over the last year, so I decided that, hey, I should start one. I'm a big fan of Damian Abraham's Turned Out a Punk podcast, Billy Powers' Urban Achiever podcast, and Mark Maron, and a lot of I'm just really into the one-on-one conversation type podcast, as well as others, but I think you can get a lot of depth and information in a one-on-one setting that it's hard to get there in a multiple person interview. So that's mostly, I mean, I'm not saying I'll never do a multi-person interview, but most of these interviews are probably going to be one-on-one. I'm really interested in documenting stories and things that happened within the DIY music community. So that's what I'm going to try to do. So my first interviewee is my friend Dan Kushner. He's a really interesting guy. He's an artist. He's a writer. And I think you're really going to enjoy what he has to say. Shout out to Podcast of Pennsylvania for letting me be a part of this, despite the fact that I don't live in Pennsylvania anymore. And also shout outs to my good friends at the Loaded Words podcast. If you're already on the Podcast of Pennsylvania feed, check their stuff out because they're my friends and they're awesome. All right, so without further ado, enjoy this interview with Dan Kushner, and at the end, he's going to play a song from his project Songs for Left Hand. So enjoy. Thanks, guys. We are recording. So I'm sitting here with my friend Dan Kushner. Kushner?
You said it right the first time.
I figured so.
You've always said it right.
Yeah.
But I like how you.
I think
you wanted to cover all the bases.
Doesn't Alex say it weird?
He always says it weird.
Yeah.
Yes, I think at first it bothered me a little bit, but like after a while, it's sort of endearing in its own way.
Yeah.
Because it's still the same name. Like pronunciations are kind of very personal and subjective.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah.
So it's all good. Yeah. So yes.
So I am here with Mr. Kushner, and he is a writer and a musician, and he kind of does a whole lot of things. How would you describe yourself?
Yeah. So yes, I am a writer. That means a few different things. So I guess if we were to break it down, so I'm an arts journalist. I write a lot about music primarily, but also about theater and visual art. I'm also a poet and opera librettist. Basically what that means is simply I write the words for operas. In particular, a specific opera that I've been working on for a few years now. But yeah, it's basically the screenwriter for opera is sort of I feel like that's a fairly easy way to explain it. So there's that, and I also play music from time to time in bands or solo, and I feel like that covers the sort of range of who I am in terms of the work I do.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot more than what most people do.
It depends
as far as creative things.
Sure, but I mean it depends on the time of year these days too, and just there are a lot of factors. Like I think that music in general is such a sort of fluid and a temporary thing in a lot of ways. Probably more so than those of us who spend a lot of time on it would want to acknowledge. Like, so things are always changing, and I played in a few bands since moving back to the Rochester area a couple years ago, and things have changed since I started doing that, but every experience has been good and has had its value, and I'm doing less. I've been focusing more on writing these days, so there's a little bit less of the music making. I'm sure it sort of comes and goes,
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll go back to it at some point.
Yeah.
Soon.
So I'm starting this podcast with the only person I know who has had a hand in writing an opera. So we are going super classy, just right out the gate.
Actually, Adam and I, you can't see us, but we're sipping Cabernet and Chardonnay. We have a whole cheese plate in front of us. There's candles. We went all out for this.
I actually really wish that were true, because a glass of wine and some cheese would be spectacular. So
you'll be known as the podcast with wine and cheese.
It's actually going to be a wine and cheese podcast. We're actually just going to taste wine and cheese and talk about it.
So the music angle is just a facade.
Yeah.
It's just an excuse to get together and eat wine and cheese. Hey,
I really do like the idea. I may make that happen in the future.
I am a sucker for soft cheese, particularly brie. Like I have a problem. Like if it's possible to be addicted to brie, then I am, for sure. And I will go on the record today admitting that I'm asking help. I'm asking for help. I can't do this on my own. I need an intervention. I go on brie sprees, as I call them, quite a bit, way more often than I should ever admit.
A shopping brie.
Yeah, you just like going away.
It's like a shopping spree, but
shopping brie. Yeah, totally. The wedge calls to you, and you just grab it, and it's so easy. It's like it's very effortless. So yeah.
Well, I know, like, a lot of times I feel like this whole relationship that people who do podcasts have with the art of podcasting is interesting, because I feel like sometimes they talk about, like, I don't want to bring myself into your story, and it's kind of this weird, like, we're doing this because there's a little bit of narcissism, and so I figure I'll just embrace it, and as a part of what I want to do is I want to talk about, like, how we know each other, where we first encountered each other, and I think we have an interesting story too. As far as our first interactions with each other.
Oh, interesting.
So I figure I might as well just embrace that instead of and purposely insert myself into the story of the person I'm talking to.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think that makes the most sense. I don't see doing it any other way. For me, like, as somebody who interviews people a lot, and really it's the most rewarding part about being a music journalist is interviewing artists. Is I find it's nearly impossible. It can be difficult to sort of fight the urge to want to sort of be a part of the artist's story. I often find myself, the artists that I admire most after I've interviewed them, I sort of secretly want to collaborate with them. And that's and honestly, I mean that's actually happened to me more than once, where I write about people I know, and then subsequently, after writing about them, I end up playing music with them. So, never at the same time, because that would be unethical, or at least murky. But but anyway, back to what you were saying. Yes, I feel like this story. This isn't just about me. This is about us.
Exactly.
This is the story of a friendship, really, a love affair, if you will. So. You may remember, I feel like you may remember how we met more vividly than I might. So you remember a specific occasion that you and I first
I don't remember when we first met in person, but I remember our first interactions were on MySpace, I believe.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
Which is a funny story.
I'm up to speed now, yes. That's right.
So
That's
a little
weird.
So a little bit of background information. is myself and Stephen Haramis, who some of you listening, I'm assuming if you're listening to my podcast, you know who I am and know at least one of the bands I was involved in. Anyway, Steve was the drummer in
what was the name of this
Endangered
band?
Youth.
Endangered Youth.
But long before that, I was still living in Pennsylvania. He was here in Rochester, and we wanted to start a record label, had no idea how to do so. So we just did what everybody did in 2006, 2007, and made a MySpace page. And that was pretty much it. And it was called Something Better Records. You can probably still find it there. There's not really much there, but Dan Kushner was a part of our label.
I was one of the artists who I signed the contract. It was pretty lengthy too. There's a lot of legalese to get through. I had to consult with my lawyer. It was really dicey, but we worked through it. And yeah, Steve, Steve at the time was branching out musically and going beyond the sort of hardcore rock stuff that he was perhaps more familiar with, and really took a risk and started performing instrumental piano music. Mm-hmm. Just sort of like, as I understand it, kind of out of nowhere. And, I didn't really know Steve. I knew that he was in a band called The Where. Steve and I met at Roberts Wesleyan College here in the Rochester area. And Steve was in a sort of this trio called The Where, which was like, I just knew them as this noisy band who played the dorms. They'd like play literally like in the like common area, just like play shows. Like but Steve started doing the piano thing, and I at the time was also writing songs on piano, and so it kind of seemed like a natural fit. I know we played at least one, maybe more shows at this basement coffee shop that existed once a week, I believe, in the basement of one of the girls' dorms, and this place was called Hodgepodge. Mm-hmm. And I remember being told by like the older friends of mine who had been at the college longer that this was like it used to be called the Passion Pit, like not to be confused with the band from Buffalo or the lead singer of that.
Oh, he's from Buffalo.
He's from Buffalo.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Anyway, what's his name again? Just so that we're like.
The guy from Passion Pit?
Yeah.
I have no idea what his name is.
It's a Greek last name. Anyway.
I really like that band, for the record.
Yeah, so the front man is from Buffalo. Anyway, not related at all to what I'm talking about. But Passion Pit, I guess that was where people went to go make out. Unfortunately, that wasn't really happening when I was there. And if it had, I don't know that I would know what to do with myself anyway. I think I have a better idea now, but back then I certainly didn't. I'm feeling very confessional. This is very like I feel like spilling all. I think it's you, Adam. I think I just sort of like I want I'll tell you all my secrets. But so that's I was sort of like loosely affiliated with Steve and that community, but Adam and I had never at that time never.
I don't know
met.
if we ever talked.
We never communicated.
We were friends.
We were friends
on MySpace.
Wow.
Yeah.
Friends on MySpace. Never talked, and so really, what? Almost 10 years went by, like kind of a long time.
It was probably close to a decade for sure.
So Adam and I sort of met for the first time / reacquainted ourselves about 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, probably.
Something like that.
Maybe even before that, 2 to 3 years ago. Adam, as those of you who probably know as listeners and or subscribers to this podcast, Adam books and runs the majority of the shows that are performed at the Vineyard Space in the city. And I think we probably started talking at one of those shows.
Yeah.
Because I live upstairs, so it's inevitable that I will come down at some point.
Yeah.
And I often would sort of stand in the doorway and sort of listen from behind the band. I really like that perspective.
What would be really cool is that there was a venue that I used to play shows at in Pennsylvania where there was like a green room for the bands. Like it didn't make any sense. Like it was like a very tiny room, and like it was like packed when there were 20 people in there, but there was a green room for the bands, and right behind where the band was playing, there was one of those not reverse mirrors. What's that called? Like a mirror you can see through from the other side.
Oh, a double mirror?
Yeah, a double mirror. And so like you could be in the back like green room, like you're right behind where the band was playing. And if you had,
but it wasn't really a mirror then; it was just a window.
But it just looked like a mirror. On the on the venue side.
Oh, I got.
Just looked like.
So it sounds
mirror.
like this venue had been converted from a child's daycare center or a psychiatric, like a psychology office, and so like this, like where the bands play is where the children or the patients would be observed to see how they responded, like when they were by themselves or something. Like, so now that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I don't think that's what it was.
That wasn't the case.
I think it was actually the owner. I think put that in there so like bands can hang out in this little green room area and watch the other bands play, which is kind of lame. Like it'd probably be cooler to actually be out participating and showing the bands you care. But
here's the thing though. Like I feel like this is maybe an issue that. If I start to say this, we might get into like a totally different topic. But I feel like it is so nobody. I don't want to say nobody because I feel like shows here at the Vineyard Space are different in that way. However, you go to a show, say let's call it out for what it is. Show at the Bug Jar. Mm-hmm. There's an invisible wall that is 10 feet thick, at least between the performers on the stage and the audience. And the audience will never break through that wall, typically. It depends on the kind of music and whether it's danceable or whatever. But even so, there's usually this invisible barrier where there's all this open space that people don't take advantage of. And it's really disappointing to me to see like people not get involved in shows. However, you come to a show at the Vineyard Space and it's very different. It is a smaller space, but even so, there's so much greater proximity. And I feel like it's almost like the people who come to Vineyard shows have stock in the bands who play here.
Yeah, everybody kind of knows everybody. It's a pretty small, tight-knit type of thing.
There's just a personal level of personal investment, I think, that I see in artists, or in the audience. And I think, when you're friends with the musicians, that makes sense. However, the only when I go to shows at the Bug Jar, it's typically because I have friends who play there.
Yeah.
And even so, and other friends come and there's still that wall there. I don't know what's to be done about that other than just sort of on an individual basis do your thing.
Yeah.
And if you can galvanize other people to sort of join you, then that's great. But
Yeah, so that actually brings up, it's a good transition into kind of the topic that I want to talk about. Well, you interview and write about like music outside of this kind of independent DIY culture, but you have kind of roots within the DIY culture. So tell me about how you got into, I don't know if you ever got into like, what you would consider punk rock, but like whatever, like however you got into, like I know you have some ska bands that you like back in the day, but
sure.
How did you get interested and involved in kind of DIY culture?
So to go back, and sort of address everything, because there's sort of a few different things happening at once here, or at various times. So on the one hand, I grew up in a Christian home, in a I would say moderate to socially conservative home, and so the first music that first sort of quote unquote popular music that I started listening to was Christian music. I didn't start listening to secular music until I was 17 years old. I think the first artist I started listening to was like Dave Matthews Band. That was like outside the realm. So
I must confess that when it was a little earlier on for me. I mean, I have a similar background, but I like Dave Matthews too back then. Like
there's something about the gateway of Dave Matthews Band from like the late '90s, early 2000s, even, but mainly before that.
Yeah,
there's something about the music that it's sort of, I don't know why. That's interesting that you and I both have that.
Yeah,
because it's not a band that like we're necessarily proud to admit that we like. You know, it's not cool for either of us to like Dave Matthews Band.
I mean, I think he's written some really great songs, but I don't consider myself to be a fan. But anyway,
right? It's sort of it's kind of a relic of our past. But you know, yeah, sure. Like we're not active fans. I don't follow his career, but you know, I've seen him live a few times.
I think that, do you know what song is just? I actually don't think this was Dave Matthews Band, and this is totally unrelated, and we'll get back to what you're talking about in a minute. Did you ever hear that song "Gravedigger" by him?
That is, yes.
Like that chorus, "Gravedigger," when you dig my grave, dig it shallow so that I can feel the rain. I love that chorus.
I think that "Gravedigger" was played by the band often, but I believe it was released on his solo record, "Some Devil." Right? Isn't that what it was called? I don't remember
the name, but I just remember really liking that song. I haven't heard it in a long time.
Gravedigger, yeah. Once you dig my grave, make it shallow so that I can feel the rain. Yeah. It's amazing the things you remember, right? Yeah. No, I lyrically, I mean, I remember for me growing up as a Christian and listening to Christian music, as I've sort of deviated away from that with regard to music, there's Zizi's here. As I deviated away from Christian music per se, I found myself increasingly attracted to music that referenced religion or Christianity specifically, but did so in sort of a fresh way, in a way that was kind of like irreverent to the institution, but still earnest about seeking spiritual truth. Mm-hmm. So, with regard to Dave Matthews Band, the song "Bartender" was I fucking loved, because it was like, let's see, like, you know, he's talking to bartenders, like, bartender, like, fill my glass for me with the wine you gave Jesus that made him like raised from the grave after 3 days in the ground, or something like that. But something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but like, so that's sort of like the chorus, and like. And it's actually a pretty emotional song, particularly live. I should really go back and listen to that, because I would just get a kick out of it. But so there, I mean, I could point to numerous songs off the top of my head that sort of that do something kind of similar to that, in the way that they're like, look, it's kind of like the whole sort of dichotomy of, look, like, I'm down. I think what it comes down to, it's not always explicit in these songs, but like, I'm down with Jesus and what he stands for, but the fucking religion sucks. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, I mean, I don't really want to go into that right now, because it's a whole other conversation. But I think that's there. So back to the sort of buckle up, podcast fans. This might take a few minutes. So there's the Christian music angle of it. So I was listening to like Christian rock music, and particular. So my favorite band growing up, particularly in high school, was the Christian ska band Five Iron Frenzy.
Great band.
Yes, an excellent band. I'm a little less interested in their recent comeback. I just kind of, you know, whatever. I mean, it's not the point. But like, so yeah, Five Iron Frenzy was a huge. But I listened to like group. I remember listening to artists like Dogwood and like Slick Shoes and Plank Eye and Common Children, and I remember going to. There was a period of my life when, this is getting political suddenly, so warning, where I was really strongly pro-life, and there were personal family reasons for me being raised that way and thinking that. So, but part of that was I would go to like Rock for Life shows. Oh yeah,
like, a lot of those bands. I don't know about those bands specifically, but bands from that scene were super involved in that.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Rock for Life still is, I would think, a pro-life organization that used rock and hardcore concerts as a tool to spread the message, and they would get bands to align themselves with this pro-life agenda.
Yeah.
But I don't mean that derogatorily. I'm just saying it is what it is. It was the concerted effort to promote this perspective of being pro-life and being a Christian, what that meant. And so at that time as a teenager, if I was listening to heavier stuff, that's what I was listening to. For me, the underground sort of DIY scene didn't happen for me until I started going to college here in Rochester. This was in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and there was a particular concert that I went to at a now defunct venue called the AV Space, which was located in a loft in the public market. So where the Yards is now, very very similar to that space in a certain way, but a few doors down. And anyway,
3 doors down.
Three doors down, if you will.
We have now referenced Dave Matthews Band and 3 Doors Down in this podcast.
We are just one small step away from mentioning the worst band ever in the history of mankind. But I won't do it here.
All right.
Unless you want to.
No,
and I think you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, it's not important.
There's a couple I'm thinking of, but I don't know which.
Well, you're definitely thinking of one of them, so that's all that matters. We'll leave it at that. I think you all know. I hope that you are choosing your friends accordingly. If they like this band, don't be friends with them. You should just disavow yourself of them right away. I'm kidding, sort of. So this concert I went to at the AV Space. There's a Buffalo punk band, Lemuria. And also a local Rochester noise band called Gaybot. And
who was in Gaybot?
Brian Blatt was in Gaybot. There were other people too, but he was the only one I knew really.
I knew who he was, but I didn't know if anybody else I know was. And
Gaybot was a performance art noise rock band. Just you never knew what they were going to do. I mean, I've seen Brian wear a tutu and a gas mask on stage and just rock it out, and is really interesting. And then there was this freak folk band called Doofus, I think at the time was handling for Mythica, but now has since called it quits, but the frontman Seth Fergolzia is a Rochester citizen and community member, and has a band called the 23 Sages, which I would later join. So this concert really sort of opened my eyes in terms of, wow, this is the kind of community I want to be a part of. This is the kind of scene I want to be a part of. It was so authentic and immediate and real and fun and artsy, but totally irreverent and unexpected and just weird. I think for me, I'm kind of a weird guy in some ways, and so I was able to embrace that, and it just sort of, I was always interested in sort of hearing new things, and I don't know, it just really was a game changer for me. So I think from then on, I was sort of aware of concerts like that, particularly here in Rochester. And then when I later moved back to the area after several years' absence, I sort of plugged right back in. I was starting to play with the 23 Sages, Seth's band, and so we would frequently play house shows at the Meddlesome Lab. And so at Meddlesome, it's a great venue because you can always hear new acts that you never would have come across, and some of them are just phenomenally talented. And so yeah, I mean, so there's that side of me too, but the other part is that a lot of the music I cover is classical music or opera or stuff that's usually presented in a much more formal setting. So that's also sort of a part of me too, and that's always been there since my early childhood. So all these things were sort of happening in kind of bring me to sort of where I am now, where I'm interested in all of it, and it's all good. It's all great for different reasons, and so that's sort of, in a nutshell, in a unorganized nutshell, the sort of background of where these different sort of influences and inspirations kind of converge. Although I don't know.
a very interesting guy.
I think I try to be. Yeah, I'm glad some people think so.
I just, I feel like you don't meet a lot of people that have the type of diverse interests. I mean, I guess it's all kind of falls under the, this umbrella of the arts, but
Right.
within that, you seem to have a deep appreciation for a very wide
It's just
perspective, very wide perspective.
Sure. I mean, it's really just a matter of exposure more than anything. Like if you are aware of it and you're around it, I think you're going to take some of it in. And so, I think in certain communities, someone who has sort of the cosmopolitan, I don't think that's really the word I want to use, but varied musical taste or whatever, they might be more rare in some communities. And then you go to like a city like New York, and in particular scenes where everybody has these sort of dual experiences, or like everybody, like, I mean, when I was living in New York for a little under a year, and covering the kind of music I was covering down there, everybody sort of like, everybody is classically trained. Everybody like would go to, familiar with that scene. Those same people also grew up playing in heavy metal bands. Like so it just depends. It's not as, I don't know that it's as uncommon as we think it is. The sort of like, but it is and it isn't, right? It just sort of depends on environment and opportunity, and unfortunately, it also depends on privilege. Like I was blessed with growing up in a home that, despite its sort of conservative trappings, was open with regard to the arts and really valued music and the arts, and so I think that was what sort of made it all like so accessible to me, and not everybody has that opportunity. So I recognize that, and that's certainly a factor. But I don't know. You just sort of are who you are, and you like what you like, and you do what you do, and there's really, I don't know that there's really like an explanation for it other than like this is how it happened, and
cool.
There you are. I don't know.
So. You were talking a little bit about the opera that I don't know if you mentioned specifically the opera. I mean, you mentioned that you've written for an opera.
Yes.
And that was performed, or at least some of it was performed.
Correct.
Can you tell me about how all that? I'm just not even asking as much for the podcast as much as I want to hear the story myself about like how that happened, how you ended up writing an opera,
sure,
and it getting performed and all of that. I'm super curious about that because you are literally probably the only person in my circle of friends who has anything like this happen in their life.
Yeah, sure. So okay. So let's see. It's 2015. I would say probably in 2010, I had gotten out of grad school for arts journalism, and I was back home. And I remember listening to this opera by a 20th century composer by the name of Leos Janáček, and it was called The Cunning Little Vixen. And it was actually sort of based, it's this kind of folk story based on like a comic strip from his day about this like fox who's like this vixen, this female fox who's like going on these adventures and getting into trouble and all this stuff. So he turned it into an opera, and I really liked the idea of like, I don't know, for some reason a fox in opera, like fox in opera, like really interested me. And so like I think I started thinking about my own sort of story and a kind of story that I wanted to tell. And so I just sort of started developing the story on my own. In college, I had amassed several different sort of scenarios and synopses and sort of like snippets of ideas for operas, and they were all some of them were sort of much more like unoriginal and sort of like crafted after sort of classic operatic stories like La Boheme and stuff. So I had done that for a few years, and so this was sort of a natural progression to sort of really hash something out. And so I started writing this story, essentially this love triangle, which ended up being about a gender fluid individual, a transgender individual, Nate, who has to sort of decide how to reconcile their most recent relationship in the very, very recent past with a devoted, sort of perhaps naive and idealistic partner named Meg, and take that relationship and reconcile it with the sort of new burgeoning relationship that's happening with this other character who appears in a fox mask. And this character is named Errol, and Errol seduces Nate and leads them into the woods. And so they're sort of like trying to sort of figure out whether to go back to Nate or to continue with Errol, or to sort of some combination or something, and so that was a compelling story to me, I think, ultimately by itself, but it was also sort of a way for me. Each of these characters symbolized a different perspective that I had on love and relationships, and so it was me trying to sort of figure out what I actually thought, and what my perspective was. And in the end, I don't know that I actually came up with a definitive answer, really, but so I had a story called The Fox and the Pomegranate, and I had contacted a singer I knew in New York, who I had met through interviewing for an article, and I asked her if she knew of anybody who was looking to collaborate with a librettist on an opera, if she knew of a composer. And I guess at the same time, there was a composer in Brooklyn named Matt Fry, who was sort of asking this person, Melissa Hughes, a similar question. And so Melissa sort of essentially kind of set Matt and I up on this creative blind date. It wasn't a literal date, but like there wasn't a particular instance. But like we started corresponding over the internet and working on stuff. And
this was in 2000 as well?
It was not. No, this was post MySpace era. And 2011, this was in the summer of 2011. And so here we are, 4 years later, and we've been developing this for years, and it's been a long, painstaking process that isn't nearly over. The opera's only half finished. The first act, the part that's done, was staged at SUNY Potsdam last November as part of this opera competition that we were selected for as one of the 3 winners. So we did that, and it was a really rewarding experience. And you can find the opera on YouTube. You can, if you were so inclined. I think if you search The Fox and the Pomegranate, you would find it. So anyway, it's out there. And, I mean, that's sort of the nutshell of like how, I don't know that explains really how it happened, or like how you write an opera.
Yeah.
I don't think it begins to really address that. but so that's sort of how it kind of, that's sort of the basic evolution of the work.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Now, tell me about Music for Left Hand.
Okay.
What is that exactly? Because I know I've seen that on Facebook events, and I've seen you play a few times in the last year or so.
Yeah.
So tell me about that project.
Music for Left Hand shows up every so often. It's a really sporadic solo project that I have. Really a sort of continuation of what I started doing when I was in college. Back then I was calling myself Dan Kush. Almost inexplicably now that I think. Not inexplicably, but it's just I feel like the name doesn't fit the style of music, you know. Here I am, a songwriter who was very influenced by like Ben Folds and just sort of like Ernest,
Ernest, like the Ernest movies.
Yes, the Ernest movies. I was very influenced by those. It really shows up in my work. But just really sort of sincere, earnest, sort of like indie pop balladry, I guess, sort of. So Music for Left Hand was just sort of like what I started calling myself when I performed solo here in Rochester within the past few years. So I would just do these short sets of like 20 to 30 minutes, and it would be a combination of original tunes and covers and just stuff I wanted to do. And they were typically, these shows were typically, they were prepared with varying degrees of attention to detail and hard work and sometimes lack thereove. And so I find as a solo performer, I'm not always as motivated as I think I would like to be, and it's hard. I'm much more interested in playing in a group of people.
I 100% relate to that.
Yeah,
like I'll write things by myself and then do nothing with them. But if I've got a band that I'm playing with, then I can push myself to do stuff.
Yeah, it's so much easier and just like it's so much more interesting to me. I for me, it's all about responding to what other people are doing and having other people respond to what you're doing. That's way more interesting than sort of just replaying what you think about whatever it is over and over again. And that's kind of what being a solo artist is to a certain extent. And so, so music for left-handed is something I trot out every once in a while when I've been playing. But I haven't been doing much of that lately. It's just a sort of fun thing I essentially do for myself, and there's very little you can't really there's not much of a sort of online footprint for it.
Gotcha. So you haven't recorded anything or put up a Bandcamp or anything like that?
No, I've never been so motivated to do that. I think that I would really want to sort of like hone in on what it is that I was really trying to do. I think it was just a sort of way to sort of like play live and perform songs and enjoy doing that. And it hasn't gone much further than that in my mind. I think I sort of tend to get distracted by a variety of different projects. So like there's this opera, which is an ongoing thing, but I'm also sort of in the process of preparing a small collection of poetry that will have some visual accompaniment to it that I did not draw, but an artist friend of mine did, and so that should be coming out, I think, probably in the spring of next year.
Cool.
I was going to release it this year, and it just sort of it no longer sort of felt like the right time, especially during the holidays. Here we are in December, and nobody wants to nobody has the time, the resources, the money. Like nobody. Everybody's just too busy.
It's hard to do. Yeah, nobody wants to do anything.
Well, you don't want to shell out money for like something that isn't a present for your family.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like people like December is the worst time to sort of launch a Kickstarter campaign for like a CD or something.
Yeah.
And I know this because I was involved in a project where that was done, and it was hard. It was a really difficult time to do it, but really one of the worst. So like, you know,
I think it's a good time to release music, though.
Why do you think that?
I don't know. Like, especially if it's like real good, and like when people are like making their I put it out right when people are making their best of lists of the year.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think people are receptive. People are like waiting or listening for new music. They're like trying to catch up on what they missed.
I know I definitely do.
Sure.
And so, you know,
I think you're right about that.
You put something out like first couple weeks of December,
or late November.
Yeah. Then it's like, you know, real fresh in everybody's minds when they're making that list. Not that anybody's
that was
list.
what was holding me back, Adam. I didn't release the Music for Left Hand EP in December like I should have, and if only.
It is interesting for me. I don't know. I've have such an interesting, weird relationship with music, though. I feel like I get caught up in late November and December of all the stuff that I didn't pay attention to throughout the year, and then, you know, I make a list, which nobody really cares about other than myself, and maybe a couple friends will like it on Facebook. But I do find myself, I go back to listen to, like, those end up being the albums that I listen to the most in the coming year. So, I don't know. So think about it for next year.
There you go. I feel like year-end lists are the opportunity that I have to feel guilty about all the music I didn't listen to. Like you know, like you go to like NPR's site and you look at like all songs considered, and I mean, you know, it's extensive. Like there's just so much music being released, and it's exciting. It's great, but you know, it's kind of, you know, you don't want to. You can get a little intimidated or frazzled or whatever, like thinking about all the music that you don't know or that you don't have any sort of handle on. You know,
it's unbelievable the amount of stuff out there now.
Yeah, for as many people as there are. I mean, you know, just like, you know, wouldn't have it any other way. But you know, it's its own sort of daunting challenge. I guess.
I was talking to a friend that's fairly younger than we are the other day, and I was thinking about, and we were talking, and I was like, you know, he grew up in a totally different like culture as far as music availability, because I know like you're a couple years older than I am, so for me, and where I grew up was in the middle of nowhere, so I was probably even more isolated than what you were. Just anything you could get your hands on because there wasn't internet, so it was like whatever.
How did we hear about music back then? I don't even know anymore. Like I think we were like reading magazines and shit.
Yeah,
I think
for real. I
just whatever your friends like got, or television or something. You know, I think even back then, maybe television represented the music. You know, that put out the music, like put the music out there that we were interested. Like I don't know what it was, but somehow it got to us. I mean, yeah, it's really crazy to think about how music was distributed before the internet.
Well, even
it feels like the dark ages to me.
Even like some of the all those like Christian punk bands that you mentioned earlier on. Like I grew up with those bands too. I mean, some of those bands I still love. I love Dogwood. It makes me really sad that I'll never get to, because I don't think they ever even toured the East Coast.
They probably didn't. They were a California band, right?
Yeah. And like I love like I've got a Slick Shoes patch on my backpack right now in
Slick
2015.
Shoes. Do you remember the Huntingtons? They were like a direct ripoff of like the
Ramones. Actually, Mikey Huntington was on another podcast that I listen to sometimes called As the Story Grows, and he was on. I think the episode must have came out within the last couple of days.
Interesting.
And so it's like the current episode. And I actually listened to that today, which was really interesting. That guy, like, he's got like a government job.
Oh, that's so disappointing.
It's so weird.
But you know what?
He works for
so typical.
Like the singer from the Huntingtons works for the Department of Defense, which is so strange to me.
It's pretty absurd. It's ridiculous.
What was the point I was trying to make? Oh, just that, like, thinking it's crazy that, like, in that day and age that we found out about those bands.
Yeah, that we even knew. Yeah, sure.
I mean, a lot of that's probably because of, I don't know, for me, HM Magazine was a big deal when I was a kid.
Right. I was reading the softer stuff. Literally, HM stands for hard music.
Yeah.
Right? And, like, so there's sort of a pun there, or maybe not, but like I was reading like fucking like Release and shit.
Okay, I remember, and there was CCM magazine too, as far as like
which is not the hockey equipment distributor. It's contemporary Christian music.
Yeah, which I don't think either of those magazines exist anymore.
Do you remember Seven Ball magazine?
I do actually.
That was great. I really
cool
liked
stuff.
Seven Ball. Yeah, I found out about stuff through Seven Ball.
Okay.
Trying to think of like Christian rock bands that I used to. Skillet was kind of
they got real mainstream.
Yeah, and also really sort of like electronic.
Uninteresting.
Their first album was really good, right? It's kind of raw.
It's been so long since I've heard it. I can't.
Yeah, I don't know what really good is anymore. Like I'm thinking about all this through the spectrum of like me when I was like 15.
Yeah, like because I liked it, but then I heard that. What was the name of the band? I listened to so many podcasts where they've interviewed people from like that weird like 90s like punk and alternative scene, and the dude from what's that band called? Scattered Few, like an old Christian punk band. The dude from that band later on was in like kind of like this like dark like I don't know, like kind of goth, like I can't remember the name of the band. But he was in a band that was like that, and I guess they ended up touring with Skillet, and on this podcast, that guy pretty much said that the guy from Skillet just like totally ripped off his style of dress and style of music, and like that's where he got it.
That's
was
what
from that guy.
Came from, yeah.
Like where it changed.
Skillet was super grungy when they started. Like,
yeah,
they were like a grunge rock band or something. Well, that's the thing about so much of the Christian music out there. Not that there aren't good Christian artists out there, but it seemed like the whole point of it was like starting from the standpoint of unoriginality. Because what they were doing was trying to sort of create the alternative to whatever the secular band is that they were most like. So, like, you know, like for example, Third Day was a Hootie and the Blowfish like ripoff, and like I don't know, POD was a ripoff of like fucking you know, Tom Morello's band.
Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah, right? Like,
there was a lot of, I don't know, like, I feel like POD kind of did a good job of, like, there was a lot of diversity in their sound, at least in their, like, maybe mid-period records.
They were pretty deep. Yeah, it's not like
they
were bad.
I kind of like POD. I still have POD on my iTunes. So,
sure.
Like, they're not my favorite band by any means, but...
I feel like we have to mention, like, so Adam's taste and my taste differ in a lot of ways, but there's one band in particular that we totally agree on. That we would be really wrong if we didn't mention.
Well, we already talked about Dave Matthews Band.
Not Dave Matthews Band. Funny enough. So I don't know how I don't know. Adam and I are really both pretty big Me Without You fans.
We sure are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you're like not that you're the only one who's heard of them, but like you're sort of the one I can sort of turn to talk about.
Yeah.
Another one of my really good friends is a huge fan too, but in terms of like in the community that we're both in, you're the only one that really sort of gets it.
And I was fortunate enough to be, you know, less than 3 hours away from Philly throughout most of my, you know, late teens and early 20s.
What is it about that band that's so good? Like, what? Like, why do you think? Like, what is their thing that works so well? Like,
I don't know. I can't really put my finger on it.
I think a lot of it has to do with Aaron Weiss and his
writing.
I mean, he's arguably the best lyricist I've ever seen. I mean, honestly, I would put him. I mean, for me, in terms of like lyricists, musicians that I like listen to right now that are active, like, I think he's right up there with like Joanna Newsom and Leonard Cohen, even to a certain extent. Like totally different style and aesthetic, but just in terms of the mastery of the language and like the use of story, he's just really intelligent and like deep. It's really remarkable stuff.
And I think I don't know. I think that the rest of the guys in that band do such a great job of like putting music to what the emotions that he's expressing in his lyrics. So yeah, there's definitely something special about that band, and I almost, to be honest, I didn't love 10 Stories. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And then this new record is, the more I listen to it, the more I love it.
I really need to listen to it more. I haven't listened to it much. From what I understand, it seems like it's sort of like an amalgamation of all the different styles they've sort of been through. It's sort of like, it kind of, not splits the difference, but it kind of covers like the sort of, the a little bit of the more melodic, folksy stuff that they did on Everything Is False. Everything is...
it's all crazy, it's all false.
It's all crazy, dream. It's all false, it's all dream. And like the edgier stuff from like Catch for Us the Foxes and even to a lesser extent like Brother Sister.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 10 Stories. I don't know that it really resonates with me so much either, but I think the first time I saw Me Without You perform was I saw them at CBGB. like the club, like
That's so cool.
the original club, like CBGB. It had to have been like within a year or two of me seeing them, that club must have shut down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I think it was in probably 2006.
Okay.
When did it shut down? Like 2007, probably 2006. I must have seen it in like 2005 or 2004.
It was 07 or 08.
Yeah, so it was
I don't know.
within 3 years. But so I saw Me Without You play there with Blindside, another
cool.
Christian band. It was actually really good, really good hard rock band.
Fantastic.
Yeah, really tight. Like, yeah. So something there, and I also saw Bradley Hathaway was opening for them. this Christian slam poet who then would later do folk music and had a show booked here at the Vineyard Space for a bit.
He had to cancel his tour, unfortunately,
to pursue a career in botany or something or whatever.
He was teaching somewhere in like North Dakota or South Dakota.
Very interesting. Yeah, so I saw Me Without You. I mean, it's just such a magnetic live performance. I mean, like Aaron Weiss is just so. You're just immediately sort of like drawn to whatever he's doing.
Very interesting.
His style, his physical style is like aggressive, but like a little not like totally non-gender specific. Like I don't want to say effeminate because that makes it sound that sounds like a mischaracterization. But like yeah, I just loved the way he was just sort of so fucking vulnerable.
He's
like
so free on stage.
Yeah.
In a way that
I know I model
can't
myself
imagine,
after that.
I
aspire to that sort of
being that, like just feeling that comfortable and free with myself in that situation.
And I also liked it because like when he was on stage singing, like you feel like you were watching him like work through some shit. Like the way he would like so. Me Without You, like they like yell often, like especially the earlier stuff. There's like yelling poetry over the top of the music. It wasn't even necessarily singing most of the time, but like the way he would do that is just like he was like exercising demons or like. But I just love how like physically like you would see he'd like. I feel like like he'd like hit himself in the head or like you know what I mean. He'd have these gestures where he'd like look like he was like. Simultaneously in torment and sort of completely free.
Yeah,
it was just really weird.
This is just making me want to see them again.
I know.
It's been a while.
They're right up there with the best. They're tied for the best live band I've ever seen. And the other band that's tied with them is totally different. So it's not even a matter of like them and Sigur Rós to me are the best live experiences that in terms of like band, like a band that I've ever had. Just in terms of the whole thing, and Rick Mazzotta he's the drummer,
something like that. I don't know if you're pronouncing it right because I don't know, but that's
I don't know. Anyway, he's like a human Tasmanian devil.
Yeah,
on the drum, like a really good drummer, super energetic, their sound is just so textured and multifaceted and layered. And
they're all nice guys.
Yeah.
Like, have you met them?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
unfortunately because I was really awkward. Like, if, it was like not that they would remember me, but yes, I met Aaron and Mike, and Mike was really nice. Like,
I met Mike not at a show that wasn't a Me Without You show.
Cool.
Yeah, it was, and I had met all the other guys because I'd seen them a whole bunch of times. Like I said, I was only
in Pennsylvania.
I wasn't that far from Philly, so I had the fortune of seeing them fairly often, and I just never it was always different guys at different places and never all together as a group. And then I went to see Brand New at the Electric Factory in Philly, and Mike was there, and I said to my friend I was there with, I'm like, I'm kind of being a creeper right now. I'm watching Mike from Me Without You walk around. I'm like, they're my favorite band. I've met everybody else, so I kind of awkwardly was like, hey, and shook his hand, and he was there with his wife, and she was very pregnant, and they were, which that doesn't add anything to the story, but they were. It
kind of does actually. It's sort of to me thinking of you're you bring your pregnant wife to a brand new concert is kind of odd, right?
I feel like they're probably. I mean, they had toured with Brand New, so they were probably, they
just like seeing.
They
friends,
were probably
really.
guest listed.
Oh yeah, totally. But it is sort of odd for a pregnant woman to sort of be at a rock
I mean,
show.
it was also too like they were up. There's like a
judgmental, but
there's a balcony.
Okay,
so they were up on the balcony, so they weren't. She wasn't like down in the pit or anything weird like that. So they're up on the balcony, and he was getting a beer at the bar, and so
she wasn't crowd surfing with the stomach first.
And she wasn't. She didn't get a beer at the bar. It was just him.
I like that you know that. I like that you were watching them intently enough that you made sure.
Yeah, I saw him from a distance.
She was doing the right thing. That's the dedication right there. But I totally sympathize. I don't know. They're just great.
Do you think? Well, I think maybe another part of their appeal, and especially to people like us, who I think maybe grew up in church, but are also fascinated by kind of dark things within art and music. There's kind of a lot of, especially in some of those early songs, they really talked a lot about spirituality and also talked about some dark shit simultaneously. So I think that I know I'm definitely I'm very drawn to that type of art as well.
Well, particularly for music associated with Christian artists, I think that there's a certain level of honesty there, right? There's a line about I don't remember which song. I think it's on Catch First the Fox, but about not having thought about killing himself in a while.
Yeah.
And he admits lusting after people, and he's very sort of quick to identify his own faults.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, that sounds it sounds really kind of almost goody two shoes, sort of mention it. But for a band that was sort of identified as a Christian band, I'm not sure how fair that is, because there's so much more than that, and spiritually they're broader than that too.
Yeah.
There's a huge Sufi element to what they do, and some certain songs they speaking in Arabic, and so it's much broader than that. But for a band that was identified as Christian, and for good reason, I mean the lyrics are. There's a lot to do with Christ and that example and biblical stories and the Judeo-Christian heritage. But, that was kind of a big deal to be talking about that kind of stuff. Because Christian bands don't do that. It's much more superficial, typically, I think.
Well, I love how culturally, I think things have shifted as to where now, unless it's straight up worship music for in church, there's not I guess it's still there. Maybe I'm just not aware of it. But I feel now it's more common for people to just make music and put it out there and more let their faith impacts it, but they're not using Jesus as a marketing tool.
Right. Do you think the availability though of music and how it's distributed and the fact that people just put out their own thing and you can find it on the internet, the fact that they're not necessarily beholden to Christian labels, maybe, do you think that might be a factor? I feel like that must be.
Yeah, it must be, and also because I think there was kind of within that weird Christian bubble culture that we both were around when we were younger. You knew you could walk into a Christian bookstore and anything that's in there, is Christian music.
It's approved.
And so there's that stamp of approval, and now there really isn't anything that's equivalent to that. So everything is totally, it just is what it is, and people have to, like normal people, just decide what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah. There was a Christian bookstore called Bender's that I always used to go to for all my music and stuff. Now I'm thinking about it, I really wish it was it lived up to its name. I wish it was just a bunch of gender ambiguous people running the store, and they call it Bender's, or even just really drunk employees, that might have been more interesting. But you could get your you could get the latest DC Talk record and buy that precious moments figurine for your mom.
And Testaments.
You know?
That was a thing. They were like mints with like Bible verses on them.
Oh man, the shit that like there should be a museum like dedicated to like Christian culture.
I have a friend who owns a T-shirt.
It could be like outside Liberty University or something. You know, like.
I have a friend who has a T-shirt that has like the Mountain Dew logo on it that says "Do the Jew."
What?
It says "Do the Jew" and then has some Bible verse about Jesus.
Do the Jew?
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Jesus Christ!
Exactly.
No, that's crazy. Do the Jew?
It's such a
that was
weird.
Like he bought that at like
he bought it at
like
a conference.
The fact that somebody like produced that T-shirt and thought, nailed it. Do the Jew. That doesn't have any sort of weird sexual, blatant connotation to it.
I like to think that somebody like thought of it and they were like, I wonder if we can get this past everyone.
I know.
Like,
and yes, you could.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean,
it's funny because I wasn't like necessarily going to like bring up like. I mean, obviously, it's going to come up as I talk about my story and talk about like my interaction with music. You know, it's going to come up, but I wasn't like necessarily trying for this to be like a podcast that touches on
about religion.
Yeah,
but
it's obviously going to come up, and I think there's interesting conversations to be had, and I think
sure.
I mean, I'm still consider myself a Christian, and I'm trying to be a follower of Jesus, but I don't have any time for that type of stupid ass religiosity and just weird cultural bubble at all. So
I feel the same way, and yet I don't consider myself a Christian anymore. But that's sort of, I mean, you know, I mean, not to get into it too much. I mean, but if you were to like ask me and go into depth, it's a little more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. But it just has to do with figuring out to me what was essential to spiritual belief and what was not, and the majority of, if not all of really what like an organized church, an organized institution is about. It just all feels so unnecessary at best to me most of the time. So, but anyway, I mean, but that's always going to be a part of me, and the music that I listened to when I was really totally into the whole Christianity thing. I mean, that's always going to be a part of me, and you know,
yeah, I would be.
I'm always going to remember the lyrics to the chorus from Breakfast by Newsboys. Like, you know, that stuff
if
doesn't
DC
go
Talk
away.
got back together and did a reunion tour and came anywhere near here, I would totally go.
I don't know that I would.
I mean, I feel like it would be like I feel like I would have to go and then like have to do something.
So weird.
Oh, it would be super weird.
I'd have so many mixed feelings about it.
But at the same time, I feel like there's a part of me that would just geek out and sing along to every song.
I totally agree. Even if I didn't agree with it anymore. I mean, not that like the lyrics were like those lyrics were like.
I think they're like. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like DC Talk was mostly just had some.
It was just kind of about just feel good stuff. It was like not feel.
Well, they had that one. They had that one song about abstinence that was on Free at Last. It was like
I don't want it. I don't want it. Yeah. Until we take the vow. Yeah, really cheesy shit.
Which I bring that. I've referenced that song in conversation with friends.
Well, you and I have like shown people like old DC Talk videos.
Yeah, because
right?
I mean,
like together, you and I have been like showing people.
Yeah, like most of
because they don't understand
most of our friends that even those who are involved with the church that I'm involved in, or even those who are believers, a lot of them did not grow up in that culture, so they don't. It's so goofy to them.
But it's so comforting to know that someone else did, and to like be able to have these like cultural signifiers that are kind of obscure, but like immediately like identifiable. Like it's pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think we've got a good over an hour's worth of conversation.
Oh yeah, well over. You don't want to overwhelm the people with me. Yeah. I'm best in small doses. So I guess I'll play a really old song for you that I wrote when I was in college called "You Are the Poison." Let's see. Wow, it's been a while.